Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. My name is Josh Treese, and I'm coming to you from Music City, USA, with the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. This week's guest is David Hampton. David is a certified professional recovery coach, as well as the host, or rather one of the hosts, of the Positive Sobriety podcast. David and I met through Jenny Matern, who was a guest on the podcast a few weeks ago, and just hit it off. David is amazing, and I know that you're going to love the conversation that I had with him. So let's not waste any time and jump right in. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Well, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have you on. I'm so excited that we got connected through a guest that I had on a few weeks ago, Jenny.
Right.
You are in the same office space as her.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so one of my favorite things so far about doing the show is the connections that it's created.
Right.
With people that are listening, with other therapists. It's just creating this cool community that I think I'm just so excited to be a part of. And so I think from what you said, maybe Jenny had just shared with you, hey, this guy just came in and interviewed me for a podcast. And
yeah.
And then here we are.
Yeah, and I got a chance to listen to your episode with her, which is awesome, and it was great. And I thought, well, that looks fun. I want to do that.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I like the most, there's a lot that I like about doing this, and it's a little bit unbelievable that I get to, but that I like the most about this is, of course, Therapist Theater, relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. Mm-hmm. We dive into the stories of movies and how it can relate to us as people. But what I also like the most about it is just getting to know other therapists' story.
Right.
And learning the why of what it is that they do.
Yeah.
And you're in a very unique spot in the show, because if I construct a Venn diagram of guests, mm-hmm. like, not only are you in a helping profession, but you also have a podcast that you do. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you are the first guest that I've had on who is not a traditional, either licensed professional counselor or licensed marriage and family therapist.
Right.
You're a certified professional recovery coach.
Right.
So I would love to just find out, tell me, what is a certified professional recovery coach, and what does one do?
That's a great distinction, because the state of Tennessee has something called a peer recovery specialist. That's a certification process, and it's about a 40-hour process, and you go through Department of Mental Health, and you have to be a peer, which means you need to be coming from your own recovery history and story. And a peer recovery specialist, certified peer recovery specialist, is someone that will end up working with therapists, working with social workers, working with groups, treatment centers, things like that. But on a peer-to-peer level, it's a little bit more, and I don't know if peer recovery specialists would define themselves this way or not, so forgive me, those of you out there that might be peer recovery specialists, but it is a little bit more like a notched-up sponsor, 12-step sponsor role, but a person with a lot more training. But the state of Tennessee, when they certify peer specialists, don't allow for private practice, don't allow for payment, things like that. So you're more, you're working with sober living, you're working with transitional living spaces, sober rides, maybe working with, intervention kind of work and that kind of thing. So that's a long explanation to say that's not what I do.
All right.
So that's not what you asked me. But the certified professional recovery coach has a lot more hours, and you pay tuitions, and you take courses over a couple of 100 hours, and you have some practice clients, and you have some supervision, and you get into the nuts and bolts of addiction, from the physiology of addiction, the emotional aspects of addiction, the family dynamics of addiction, how the even some of the legal aspects of what is going on in in the culture now, in the substance use issues, how those play into what you do as a person that will work with this population. And so you can, and then at that point with your certification, go into a private practice and as a coach. And a lot of times coaching can take on a lot of, kind of, what's the connotation that I'm looking for? Maybe I should stay away from one. But anyway.
Well, I think in my mind, and this is coming from like the traditional, therapist clinical education, we were kind of taught that somebody in a coaching facility, typically talking about like a life coach,
Right.
was typically if a client had a particular goal that they were trying to go after in their life, but maybe couldn't figure out, how do I get motivated? What are my creative blocks? What are my next steps? That a life coach would be appropriate in those situations.
Right.
Is that kind of related to the recovery coach role, or?
Yes, in one aspect, because the goal is recovery. The goal is sobriety. The goal is, how do I help people stay in a path and stay in a program, stay in a lane that is going to allow them to live soberly. But the other parts of the role that I play are, people are coming into my office in crisis. Everybody wants to come in and they want me to tell them if they're an alcoholic or not, or if they're an addict or not, if they're, and I'm like, I can't tell you that.
But a good litmus test is if you're in my office.
Yeah,
then
but I'm guessing that if you have, let's talk about the consequences you have with your behavior. And if you're willing to blow through consequences and still cause yourself harm, I'm going to go with addict. But, that again is a very self-identified word. And I try not to even get them to think in that term as much as, the new DSM, for instance, is a substance use disorder. And so, do I have a substance use disorder? I can get somebody to say that a lot better than I can get them to say, I must be an alcoholic. I must be an addict.
Those addict identifiers carry with them a lot of connotations.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes, if that word is a hurdle that a client just can't get over, then it's not useful. Let's find something else to...
Right, and I don't want semantics to get in the way of help, So we try to help them identify where they are in the continuum of things. And what's interesting, as you know, Josh, working with the populations that you do, there are people who can use more heavily but not necessarily fall into the category of an addict. But yet I've got other people that don't drink as much as somebody else, just using drinking, and yet they are demonstrating all kinds of addicted tendencies. So I help people with that. I help family members. I get a lot of spouses, partners, parents who come in and they go, okay, we don't know what to do. Everything we've done is just making it worse. Here's what, and we talk about all those things, try to get people into Al-Anon, try to encourage community. Who are the groups in your area that would be really great for you to know about? and offer you a lot of support, because I'm not a sponsor, and I don't want to be your on call 24/7 person at midnight that, we just had another fight with our son, and I'm like, can it wait till 9 a.m.?
It almost sounds like that you are a professional resource and connection.
Mm-hmm.
Like in somebody's pursuit of sobriety, or in somebody's walking with a loved one in their pursuit of sobriety, that you can be a resource to bounce thoughts off of, to almost what should I expect? How can I handle those expectations?
Right.
And then what you were just mentioning, finding groups and stuff, connecting them with other sobriety or recovery things that are in the area.
Right, right. And another thing that I do is I work with treatment centers in referral on a referral basis, where people coming out of treatment will start to see me as part of their continued care. And that's another aspect of it too, because, I think any of us that have gone through our own recovery stories thought that sobriety was going to be where we found our peace and happiness and the Holy Grail and the pot of gold and all the things like that.
Or that sobriety is where I will be, once I'm sober, I will be less affected by things. Like I'll feel less.
Right. And I will know automatically how to handle difficult problems in life.
Yeah,
and
I'll achieve that level of wisdom that I have not had so far.
I'll evolve into this next thing. And what people don't usually anticipate, and maybe we need to do a better job in our recovery work with people and helping them get there, is that that first year of sobriety is usually just awful. That's just the bitter truth. And I know I've sat in the millions of AA meetings, and I'm a 12-step person. I believe in the steps, but there are some things that I do question and wonder sometimes about the steps that make me wish we could do things a little differently, but that's kind of a sacred cow, so I don't kick that very often. But one of the things about the rooms is that we always talk about happy, joyous, and free as part of the AA mantra, so to speak. That we would know these things and be happy, joyous, and free, and we could live a life of that. And that comes, I think. But it's way at the end of the train, it's like way down the track. And because the first year is really tough. You don't, first of all, we always tell people, if you want to know, just using alcohol as the example, if you want to know what you're drinking at, stop drinking. And you'll know real fast. You'll realize real quickly what you're drinking at. But the thing is that what you're drinking at doesn't go away just because you got sober.
And I think that's really what makes that first year so tough, is because what's happening is the circumstances of your life aren't changing tremendously,
right,
but your engagement with them is.
Exactly.
And so it's like you're taking off, to keep with what we're talking about, you're taking off the beer goggles, you're taking the alcohol out of the equation, and you're lifting that addiction brain fog,
right,
to where all of a sudden you're having to encounter it, no pun intended, soberly.
Yeah.
And you don't have that numbing agent. You don't have that typical, I'm going to run from the issue, by doing this. And so you, in a sense, you're having to step up to the plate, be engaged. And, if you've been in addiction for a long period of time, that is in effect whiplash. That is all of a sudden coming to a really quick, turn or stop.
Right. And the people that you've trained how to treat you in your addiction suddenly don't have a role.
Yeah.
And so spouses and family members and whomever, colleagues, name it, they get a little nervous and antsy and resentful that all of a sudden, I don't know how many times, I've had people say, he or she went off and got sober and just changed the game and changed the rules.
Yeah.
But in truth, the dysfunction of that person, of the partner or the person in relationship with the addict, is in question now, because I think what we talked about a little bit on the Positive Sobriety podcast when you were our guest was homeostasis. And when you upset the system, it upsets everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially with partners, clinically we would call that person a co-addict.
Right.
Which is a word that I tend to shy away from, especially at the beginning, because I think it'll scare people off because,
Right.
well, I'm not the one drinking. What do you mean attaching an addict word, with me? But what happened, and I think back to one of the very first couples clients I ever had, started out as an individual, a lady coming in to talk about her marriage. Very quickly in that first session, I realized this needs to be a couple. So inviting the husband into and then spinning it into a couples client. But one of the things that he said to me during, I think, his individual intake that just broke my heart was he said, and she had a history of alcoholism. She had since been sober. He said, I miss the person she was when she drank because she was fun and easy to connect with.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart, and I understood where he was coming from because he knew how to connect with his wife when she was drinking. He doesn't know how to connect with her when she's feeling all of her feelings and when she's sharing the things that make her hurt or sad or lonely or angry and what she needs in those situations. He didn't have to do those things. And so when one member of a couple or a family or a system, to take it back to what we spoke about on Positive Sobriety, changes and engages with their heart, it in effect invites the other members into intimacy. It invites them to engage with theirs. And so then that work that they have to do surfaces. And if they're willing to do it, that's great. If they're resistant or even, refusing to do it, then that's really, really tough, especially for the addict who's trying to change.
Yeah.
But is encountering people who say, "Oh, I thought I wanted you to change, but I don't. I
Well,
don't really want you to."
Exactly, and even things like opinions. When you get sober, you realize you have opinions, and you voice them, and then you learn you have a voice, and then you want to use your voice so you stay healthy because.
And sometimes you have to learn how to phrase those opinions in a way that doesn't make you sound like a butthole.
Oh, totally.
Most of the time, you got to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Well, and because you're so raw, and I'm saying this because I got sober in 2005, and I drank every day for 5 years, and that's a whole other thing, which we can talk about or not. But the thing that I remember was that I felt like the world was about 3 inches from my face for months. I remember thinking, when did everything get so damn loud? The
when
phone.
you got sober.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The phone. I mean, just a door slam, a tone of voice, just something that would have been on what I'd call a normal person, day to day, not rattling. But in my early sobriety, and I was raw, and I was keenly aware that I was feeling everything in the world.
So it allowed you, or forced you, however you look at it, to not just engage your emotional feelings, but like your physical senses as well.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Golly. I mean, I was keenly aware of everything because it just felt like everything was either a chore or I had to overthink it. I had to analyze it. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And then I'd have opinions on kind of, looking back, it's kind of funny, but my wife at the time was going through bills one day when she was still able to take care of things like that. And I had just gotten really newly sober, and I went in and I saw the cable bill, and I said, "When did we start paying this for cable?" And she goes, "About 3 years ago." Welcome to the party. God, that's a lot of money for
Yeah.
cable. Well, it's Wi-Fi and phone. We have a bundle, and you agreed to it, but you probably don't remember it. So, but if you think it's a lot, here's the Comcast number. Call them and, work something out.
Oh man, I can't even imagine a newly sober person calling Comcast
Oh,
customer
God.
service and like trying to work out what to do in that situation.
You imagine that?
Talk about like a circular argument that would just keep spinning there.
That's what I want the recording of. The newly sober guy and the Comcast rep and the language barrier, all at one, all in one beautifully orchestrated conversation.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like that your role is a very special one that you get to help out a lot of families and a lot of people with. I'm wondering, why did you choose to go into that role? Typically, the question is why therapy. So in this case, like why professional recovery coaching?
Well, that's for me. There are a lot of levels to that answer. So, when you know how when you experience something in your life and you're really impacted by it, you kind of want to help pull other people out of the water too, and the more I got involved in recovery when I got sober, the more I realized I had this passion for these people that before I had just despised, because they were just like holding up a mirror to me, and I hated that.
What are they doing on the other side of that mirror? Get those people out of here.
Yeah, I mean, it was always, it's like at least I'm not like that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when Nate Larkin, who took me to my first AA meeting, I told him I had been drinking like I'd been drinking, and I told him, I said two things. I said, I'm not an alcoholic. I just drink like one. And the other thing I told him was, he said, well, have you ever been to an AA meeting? I said, why would I go to one of those? I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
Because I had this idea that everybody sat around AA in their undershirts and, after sleeping under the bridge, and I didn't have any idea that the people in AA were me. And I had a very inflated idea of who me was, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But so to get into this work, I was immersed in recovery for a long time, and then I started helping with some groups, and then I started helping with faith-based communities trying to understand addiction, which was a whole other animal. Trying to get churches and faith-based organizations to understand what to do and how to approach addiction, because they, in my experience, were bigger on moralizing the behavior than they were understanding the pain.
Right. That's something that I'm really passionate about too. I'm trying to work on a workshop that I can present to pastors to try to better understand shame, sexual addiction, and spirituality.
Yeah. Boy, that would be a very welcome and timely thing.
Yeah.
Because we know statistically, you better than I, how many pastors and church staff deal in some type of sexual, outside the lines behaviors. And the church, wants to help. It's not like I think the church is being so moralistic about it that they just, because they're high and mighty, and there's some that are, and depending on the subject, that is particularly true, but I think they just don't know what to do, and the truth is, you're not going to pray this off.
Right.
You're just not. I mean, in my belief, and I know there are people that have had experiences where they have, had epiphanies and encounters with God, and they've gotten up and walked off and never done it again, and I think that's awesome, and I love that for them.
But it's very much the exception.
It is the exception,
rule.
and the thing I find a little dangerous about that, if I believed that, which I'll leave that between the individual and God and their experience, but is that if God had struck me sober, it would have robbed me of everything that I've learned and grown from in having had to go through this experience.
Yeah.
If I had gotten up one day and I had actually just been zapped, the joke is, what would you do if you were tapped on the head and you were no longer a recovering person? And I'd be like, oh, I drink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, hell, what?
Have a drink to celebrate. Yeah.
I totally would. I mean, just,
That's interesting. I have a colleague who works in the same field, and he says he believes that God made, he comes from his own addiction story. He believes that God made him an addict on purpose because it helped him to learn dependence upon God, but it also, through his story of recovery, gave him who he is today.
Yeah.
And so I think from what I'm hearing you saying is, if a person were to experience a miraculous occurrence of having the addiction taken away, that it would rob them of their story.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've told clients before is if a lot of times, especially for the addict who does have a spiritual relationship and does pray, how many times do you pray the prayer, God, take this from me, God, take this from me, God, take this from me? And that's how I introduce surrender into the conversation, because what that's saying is I don't want to surrender it. I don't want to give it up. I just want you to take it. You make the choice, take it away, so I don't have to choose to hand it over.
Oh, yeah. And I'd love to talk about our concept of surrender and a church context of surrender and things like that too, because I think we so misunderstand what that word is.
Yeah.
And recovery taught me surrender. I thought I had surrendered because I grew up Southern Baptist and gave my heart to Jesus.
You do it at the end of every
9.
service. You walk up to the front and you pray with the pastor.
And maybe once in a while I throw in a rededication if I feel particularly guilty at a revival. If it's been a bad week, I might get to do that. But getting back to your question about how I got into this work, I was employed at a church for a long time. I came to Nashville as a songwriter, and I had 2 different songwriting deals and played piano and keys for artists for a few years. And then my wife was diagnosed with a very progressive form of MS. And so and we had one daughter who by then was 5 years old, and we had just moved into a house we built, and suddenly everything was wrong. All the great stuff that we had sacrificed for and moved here for and risks we had taken, and both of us worked really hard. It sounds a little narcissistic now, but she and I both agreed that we would focus on my career, and so she worked really hard so that I could take advantage of opportunities that I had, that we otherwise, would have both had to be out there really busting it to make ends meet. And we were. I mean, I was selling furniture and worked on the General Jackson as a waiter and all kinds of things when I first came to town, and still had my writing deal. And I thought, wait a minute, Cinderella's still got a sling prime rib. But
that's very chasing that neon rainbow kind of
That's exactly.
story.
Yeah, that's pretty much the dream there. And so when I got into the stage of things where I had seen every airport in America and 15 countries and all of that. It was a wonderful experience, but I also knew I needed to be home. Tricia, my wife, was really at that point really struggling, and we were seeing a lot of symptoms that were starting to manifest themselves more frequently and more in greater intensity. And so at that time I was at Christ Community Church in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. And in the early 90s, Christ Community was really a thriving church. It's still a thriving church, but in that point in time, it was one of the only churches like itself in the area. Now we've got many, many churches that are of its size and nature and doing things similarly. But at that point in time, it was a particular draw to the Christian music community, country music community. We had a lot of people in a bunch of different areas of entertainment there, but it was a deep talent pool, and it was a wonderful opportunity to work with some incredibly talented people. So Scotty Smith was the pastor there at the time, and he offered me the position of full-time director of worship arts in 1994. And I accepted that and started working there, started working at the church full-time. And we had benefits. My wife could get the care she needed. All that stuff was great. I, for a bunch of reasons, her illness, my own predisposition, working at a church, I started to drink. Being Presbyterian, I didn't have to hide it. I just had to hide how much I drank.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
so
Yeah.
that was the interesting thing is I did happen to go to a church where, you know, we might have we may or may not have had alcohol at staff Christmas parties and get-togethers, but I just didn't have to tell people how much I drank, you know, and what I was ending up doing was something that I had discovered way back in my early teens at my first drink. I was returning to because I realized that must be how God meant for me to feel the rest of my life. I didn't understand praying for peace when Bacardi sold it for $9.99. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, why would you do that?
Yeah.
I mean, you can 3 of these and you're great.
Yeah.
Forget it. So, so I started drinking, and I drank a lot, and I drank more and more and more. The sicker Trisha got, the sicker I got. Long story short, she passed away in 2013 from complications of MS after being, eventually, she was on a hospital bed in our home for the last 7 years of her life. And I was her primary caregiver, and it was not easy. It was not glamorous. I mean, she had a
It's a very
colostomy
tough
and
role.
urostomy by then. She had all kinds of issues that were problematic, which I won't even go into, but in and out of extended care facilities, on and on and on. Depleted a lot of our resources, even though we had good insurance. And I was tired. I was angry. I did not know exactly what to do with all the doubt and the spiritual dilemma that I felt myself in. And so when she passed away, the church by then was going through a lot of changes, leadership, new directions, and things like that. And it started looking like a good opportunity for me to begin to experience where I wanted to go with my next step, so to speak. And I had been doing a lot of writing, a lot of speaking on addiction and on caregiving as well. But
So at this point, where are you at in your recovery journey?
well, by this point, I had been sober for about 8 years by the time Tricia passed away. So I got sober in 2005. I waited a year. I waited until I'd been sober a year to tell my pastor and my leadership that I even had a problem, because I wanted to make sure I didn't fail again, you know, because I drank every day for 5 years, and most of those days I swore I'd quit, you know.
Well, the problem isn't ever quitting. The problem is staying quit.
Well,
because
exactly.
most addicts quit a million times,
Yes.
and they're really good at quitting.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of,
Yeah.
I got to stay quit.
Yeah, I had a friend that said, well, you know, they said, what were your devotions like when you were in the height of your addiction? And I said, well, every morning on the toilet, I prayed, Jesus, this shit has got to stop. And that's how I started my day.
The level of puns in what you just
Exactly.
said thrill my
Yes.
heart so
Yes,
much.
that's on so many levels
Yeah.
a wrong thing, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but that's the truth. That's what I did, and that's how I felt, and Jesus wasn't helping me stop, I didn't think, you know, and so I blamed him, so I could add him to my emotional hostages I was taking, and so by the time Tricia passed away, I knew that I was going to need to make some changes. And so I started preparing myself, and eventually started investigating certification programs, and there's a couple of things. National Association of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counselors, NADAC, the International Association of Professional Recovery Coaches. These are resources people could look up and find where to get into certification processes that would be recognized, allow you to practice, and get into the whole thing. And so, about 3 years ago, I was wrapping it up, the program, and I knew that I was going to need to get out and get into practice, but I wasn't sure how that was going to happen. And one of the therapists here, KK Ray, took me to lunch, and she said, "We're opening some offices in Maryland Farms. We've got one left, and we'd love for you to consider, coming into the office space with us. There are 6 therapists. We have a play therapist. We have a nurse practitioner, and we're going to open a neurofeedback clinic." And I'm like, "KK, that's an awesome opportunity. That sounds amazing. I just don't have any clients." So, I have this.
I don't have anybody to pay for it.
Yeah, I would love to join you in Tahiti, but it's just that I can't afford the plane ticket. And anyway, one thing led to another, and I had some money that I had acquired over the years from Christ Community, and I lived on that for about the first year of my practice, and I just decided to take the plunge. And if you build it, they will come. And I thought, well, worked in Field of Dreams, to use movie metaphors,
which we've done an episode on. So.
Wow, yeah. So, but what I realized is that therapists, a lot of times when they're doing marriage and family work, when addiction presents itself in there, that marriage and family work kind of comes to a stop until there's a decision about how the person with the substance use issue, if it's substances, is going to pursue recovery or not. And so in our practice, a lot of people will refer those people to me, and then I can help them whether they go to treatment, whether they decide to do this or do that, and I can work with them for a period of time, and then they go back and they work on what they wanted to do. And all of that. So that's kind of a long answer, but it was a long journey of getting it. It was my own sickness. It was my own recovery. It was dealing living as a caregiver for about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And of some nature, Tricia was in a walker and then a wheelchair and then the bed, and we had a van with a ramp, and we did the whole. We did the whole thing, the whole gamut. And I resented the hell out of all of it, looking back, and didn't really know how to deal with it emotionally, spiritually,
How could you?
Well, I wanted to be an atheist. After a while, I decided it would be easier if I could be an atheist, because what happens is if I'm an atheist, then there's nobody to get mad at. Like this is all just a big cosmic boom, and here we are, the little amoebas that we are, and bad stuff happens. Our bodies are just flawed, and so here it is.
Yeah.
But I couldn't not believe, and so then I had to decide, if I was going to believe, then I'd have to believe in a God who didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And then that was hard because I believed that God did give a shit, but then if he did, why am I, a struggling alcoholic and taking care of a woman who has to, have her diapers changed and be fed some days?
Yeah. I think that a lot of people who profess to be atheists, especially if they had a previous stated relationship with God. I think a lot of times what atheism really is I'm mad and I'm hurt at and from God, and I don't know how to express that, or if I have the right to express that.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give him the silent treatment.
Yeah.
It's an emotional cutoff. It's not actually I don't believe, but it's I'm uncomfortable in my grief, I'm uncomfortable in my anger, and I don't know how to engage with it. And so it's easier for me to just shut that door and lock it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for many people that's probably true. And you know, the whole crisis of faith thing, I mean, I went through that after I got sober. Even while I was still working at the church, I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid I was selling, which was a problem, which was another reason I thought maybe I needed to get out of church work because,
Yeah.
you know, I wasn't on that page anymore. I don't even consider myself an evangelical. Um, and so that's probably the time you need to get off that bus.
Yeah, you know, when I had the chance to come on your show, you know, we briefly talked about recovery and sobriety impacting every area of your life.
Yeah.
100% across the board.
Yeah.
It's going to impact your relationships to yourself, to others, to God. It's going to impact your profession. It's going to impact everything.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes a part of that journey is you continue to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's as if there are pieces of yourself that you still discover and have to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you're not giving over all of yourself at the beginning. It's that there's still pieces of yourself that you need to find.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Excuse me. This has been, you know, the journey continues obviously forever. But sobriety gave me permission to be, you know, as AA says, rigorously honest and to ask my questions and to embrace my truth and to embrace the answers I was coming up with. You know, I went to a monastery the first year I was sober, just to have some spiritual clarity because I was so perplexed by where I was landing. And I had a monk, a spiritual guide there, tell me, you know, you're not in a crisis of faith. You're losing your illusion of certainty.
Wow.
And that's part of the process.
Yeah.
You know, you just lose your illusion of certainty. And those of us that had grown up in real answer-driven paradigms, you know, we'd learn the right answer to anything, you know, lest anyone ask you, you can give an account, you know, all that stuff. And so,
even the fallback, if there's not a real answer, was just have faith.
well, yeah. Yeah.
Which, you know.
Yeah, I had a Sunday school teacher once, or a youth leader, I guess it was, and saying, you know, you're just confusing yourself. And I'm like, well, no, that could be because I'm confused. But yeah, I did. I went in and I went for a week to the monastery, and then I went back once a month for 6 months, just to get. And that was around 2006, and just to begin to get some handle around, because I realized that the world was looking at life differently on the other side of sobriety than I was, and
Life on life's terms.
yeah, and you know, I realized that, you know, that one of the other things my monk friend told me was that we as evangelicals tend to preach to God and call it prayer, you know, and that I'm telling God what God ought to do, you know, God heal this marriage, God heal this person, God take care of this financial issue, God do, God do, God do. And he said, really, this is about you, you know, what is needing to change about you? What is needing to...
Wow, you had a very confrontational spiritual director.
Oh gosh, yeah. He didn't care. I mean, what's he got to lose? He's living life in a, you know, he's in a brown robe and taking an oath of poverty and eating soup. I mean, once you kind of get to that point, you know, it's not like he's got a BMW to pay for out there that he's got to give the right answers and keep you happy and keep you coming back.
Right.
So it's pretty funny, but yeah, he was very confrontational. And because I told him, I said, I just want somebody to level with me.
Yeah.
You know, I just want somebody to level with me. So now, you know, I attend an Episcopal church that meets at Vanderbilt at St. Augustine's, and Becca Stevens is my priest, and I have other priests that are on staff there.
Thistle
Farms. Yes.
Yeah.
Such a great, you know, social enterprise, and helping women get out of trafficking, and how they have a Magdalene House and how they've worked with women getting them off the streets and employable and into a new way of life.
Yeah.
And, but they have a lot of recovery in that church, and it's a very accepting and inclusive church that people can come as they are and meet God where they can meet God.
Yeah.
And so I love that. But it's also given me a much broader ability to think openly about a lot of things that I experience now. Now that I'm able to really kind of address what before I might have tried to give myself a particular answer because I took a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that kind of part of the truth, but I think there is an element of truth to that.
Well, I mean, I think that a part of any recovery journey is the continued learning on how to be present.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you encounter, I usually shorthand it by saying when you encounter the gray, when you encounter something that's not a really easy this or that, either or, you know, good or bad, yes or no, you want to check out by, you know, throwing an easy answer at it or classifying it or categorizing it in a certain way, rather than sitting in the gray, holding that tension and being okay with, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know and I'm still okay.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't have to know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
And it's okay to have feelings in the I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know and I'm really sad about that. I don't know and it makes me angry. I don't know and, you know, I feel lonely because I don't know, because it seems like everybody around here knows and I don't. And that makes me feel separate and that makes me feel lonely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things about sobriety and surrender, you know, we were talking about surrender a moment ago, is that I need to surrender my my need to be right, you know, in a lot of ways.
That's that willfulness that comes in.
Yeah.
That I think anybody who struggles against addiction uses as a superpower. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to dig my heels in and you're not going to get me to move.
Yeah.
Because I know what's best for me and this is it. And, you know, that is the first thing that you get to surrender. It's the middle thing you get to surrender. It's the last thing you get to surrender. It's, you know, because it's like I said before, it's you keep discovering pieces of yourself that you get to keep surrendering, and that willfulness a lot of times has implanted itself in like every piece. And so, you know, every time you find it, you know, still holding on, you know, it's something that you get to give up. And that's not to say you don't get to have preferences. You don't get to have desires. You don't get to have longings. But that's just to say you get to come to the place where you realize, is this a preference or is this just something that I'm saying, forget it, I'm not, you know, there's no way that you're going to make me. You get to, excuse me, you get to examine that and to bring that out. And I think that's such a powerful part of your role as a coach and of any of the 12-step anonymous programs is the community relationship part.
Right.
It's that, and I've oftentimes told clients that I think is the number one thing that recovery gives you, is the ability to be a part of and to engage in community, in relationships, so that during those times, or maybe you do encounter willfulness in your life, or you do encounter difficulty or tough feelings, you don't have to go through it alone. That you get to have a community where you come in, and even if you don't come in with the cleaned up version, hey, let me share what went on this past week that I've already got figured out. You can come in and share, man, everything is a mess and I don't know what to do and I don't know how to feel. And it is just throwing me for a loop and I just need to check that in.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved the fact that I could go to a meeting and say, I am so resentful right now, or I am so just sideways about something, or messed up and twisted up about something, and somebody would just go, yeah, yeah, but that happens. Did you drink at it? No, I didn't have to drink at it. Well, it's a good day. And I'm like, well, that's the best
so
you've
frustrating sometimes. And I've got a client right now that's getting frustrated when I respond in a similar way. And part of the things that I share with him is like, you're coming online to these feelings.
Yeah.
You're getting sober. Like, welcome to the party. Because also, anybody else in humanity that if you plopped them down in your situation would feel the same way. So that's an appropriate stage of development in your journey. Like, you're exactly where you need to be that you're feeling that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, just tell me how to get out of it. No.
No. Well, right. Because I think here's what my experience, I think, was that I came out of, coming out of a lot of churchy language, was I had to learn a new language.
Yeah.
Because I would say shit that I didn't even know what it meant. But I knew that it meant something noble and it would pass for an answer, in some respect. But I think a lot of our feelings in our church experiences, if they're from some particularly conservative places, can be, this is how I should feel, therefore that's what I feel.
That's what I said on your show about polishing the mask.
Right.
Is those of us that grew up in a church environment develop an association between spiritual maturity and disaffectedness. The length of time that you've been involved. So the longer I'm involved at the church, then the more spiritually mature I must be, the less I am able to be bothered by things, and the more quote unquote happy I need to be.
Right.
Where the truth is, we're all people who have feelings and need to address those feelings, and very rarely are those feelings quote unquote clean and pretty and settled and resolved. Hey everybody, this is Josh, and I'm interrupting the episode to ask for your help in getting more people into the theater. I'd love to see Therapist Theater make a dent on the iTunes podcast lists. And the best way to do that is by giving it a 5-star rating and a 5-star review. You can do that now by visiting the show's page in the podcast app. Thanks so much for listening and interacting. Back to the show.
And nobody wants to look, like somehow they, are missing the mark here somewhere. So we say what we think we should say or should think. And it is disaffectedness. It is distanced from our real feeling, our real experience. And I think that, sobriety and recovery circles and the rooms, and I went to an addiction specialist, an addiction therapist, an IOP therapist for 12 years. And I started out with her 3 times a week, and then I graduated to 2 eventually, and then 1, and and then once a month and all that kind of stuff. But I saw this woman for 12 years, and man, that was an exercise in reality. Don't tell me what you should think or what you think you should think or what your image believes. Tell me what you are dealing with.
Which I think is the very first task of recovery, is learning how to show up. Just learning how to show up as who you really are. And letting that be enough.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, just show up as that person.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And the healthier you get, the less you will care what people think about it.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Really?
Yeah, I think you can still care, but be accepting of what they think.
Well, maybe that's what I mean about care.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I mean, it's not like
You may not cater to what they think.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I do, right. I think that you're
But I
less...
can still be hurt by it. Like if you
of
if you don't
course.
like me, or if you don't like a choice I made, I may still care about you and what you think of me and still be hurt by it, but still choose what's right for me.
Right. But I'm not going to alter my life based on your response to me, which would have been my sobriety MO.
The sobriety slogan would be, you take care of your side of the street, I'm going to take care of mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I don't want to sound like I could never be hurt by what people would say or think, because I still find myself wounded and at times.
And it's especially difficult if it's people that we really do care. Like if it's a family member that maybe expresses disapproval or something like that, of course you're going to care what they think. But you still, because of boundaries, you still get to choose what your life looks like. You still get to choose what you think is right for you. You still get to do the next right thing.
Yeah. I'm just not going to, I'm not going to cater to the opinion or the moment of,
But I think the big difference in recovery and in pre-recovery would be to not cut off when that happens. To not just say, oh, you have a different opinion about what I should do. Cool, you're out of my life.
Right.
But rather to come in and try to understand, try to hear them out, try to engage. Because in those situations, it could be that they're communicating something that's true and good in a really terrible way, just in a really hurtful way.
Yeah.
And part of I think recovery and learning how to have healthy and lasting emotional bonds is to be able to lean into that. Hey, let me try to hear that again. Let me try to seek to understand, because I think I'm missing you. Here's what I'm hearing. Here's the story that I'm telling myself about it.
Sure.
And if you end up in a place where you still disagree, that's okay.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, and I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. If we're going to drag an Enneagram in, and when I was, I learned, I think, your key objective in life is to never disappoint people. Never disappoint, never create conflict.
Well,
never
to keep the peace, and so that's a part of it.
You're always perpetuating, whatever is going to be peaceful, and therefore others' opinions and ideas must matter more. So when I got sober, that began to matter less to me.
Do you think that your number changed at all from addiction to sobriety?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Maybe that kind of was the wings of, like, I go this way in my unhealth and I go this way in my health.
I think my wings.
Okay.
and Ian Cron is my friend, and he's got this Enneagram, The Road Back to You book, and he's still explaining wings to me. So
I'm still learning too. I've got so many key mentors in my life right now that I look up to clinically, that whenever they get into their Enneagram flow, it's like a math professor. They're throwing out so many numbers, and I'm just like, I need give me some words, give me some titles, give me some things to latch onto.
My unhealthy,
because I'm losing you in the equation. So let's transition and talk about the movie. What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I brought Can You Ever Forgive Me with Melissa McCarthy.
Yeah, which she was nominated for an Oscar for that movie.
She was.
Yeah. Tell me, what was it about this movie that attracted you to it?
Well, initially, it was attractive to me because, A, Melissa McCarthy, I love, but this isn't her big physical humor self, big personality persona. This isn't, Melissa in Bridesmaids or, any of that, sitting on the sink in a bridesmaid's dress and saying, look away, which has to be one of the most awful, funny, horrible scenes I've ever.
It's one of my favorite gifts to send to people in a text thread, though.
It really is. I mean, you just can't outdo that. And so,
But it's not that. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, iTunes has this movie classified as a comedy,
right? Can you
which
forgive me? Is
which I watched and I was
not-
like, this is not a comedy.
No, it is not a comedy at all. And to me, anyway, I mean, she's got a very dry, kind of a cynical wit about her, but as her character. But no, she is. She allowed them to make her so vulnerable physically, in that she was not there to win a glamour,
Right.
you know, most glamorous costuming or makeup award there for sure. And but what appealed to me was, I'm always a fan of her, but to see her in such a serious, what I thought and still think is a serious role, about a very complicated personality. And the character is an alcoholic, an author, which I write. I love writing, and here she is this very lonely, rather bitter, but I think more hurt person, wounded person who. I just see her more. I saw her in this movie as a much more, in a much more sympathetic way than maybe other people might. She's certainly done. In the movie, she does some despicable things, and she's doing some things that are very illegal, and I don't know. The premise is basically, and it's a true story, which is also another interesting thing about it to me. But she's this person that is, she has justified this behavior, this illegal behavior. She forges. I can just say, right?
Yeah.
I mean, spoiler is kind of the if you from here, if you haven't seen the movie, I don't know. We may
that's
spoil
been the
it
joke
for you.
for a while. Is that if you're listening to a podcast involving movies and you haven't seen the movie, you need to know there's going to be spoilers talked about. But
Yeah.
I think that because this was a real person.
Yeah, this is sort of out there.
Yeah,
I mean,
but just in case, if you haven't seen it and you want to see it, maybe pause the show, take a watch, and then come back to us.
yeah, good. So she's forging these letters from famous people of Hollywood in the past and all of that, and she gets into it, in a rather innocent way. She happens onto a couple of letters in her research, going through books, and realizes.
Didn't she find one in like the shuffle of papers in the suitcase or whatever it was at the top of her bookshelf?
On top of her bookshelf, yeah. And then she found one in these books that she researched about these people, and found that they were worth something. Somebody would give her something for them, and she was, a best-selling author at one time, but the problem was that she was now writing books that nobody wanted, and her agent, her literary agent, played by Jane Curtin, who I thought was just kind of really great.
Did not expect her to show up. Yeah.
Yeah. She just kind of was, this sort of uppity, Upper East Side, New York literary agent type. That's just, she had kind of gotten to a dismissive posture with Lee, the character that Melissa McCarthy played, and she just had this this relationship with this agent that was like, that the conversation they had in the agent's office, basically, Lee, you're not writing books. Nobody gives a shit about Fanny Bryce.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to buy a book about Fanny Bryce, the vaudeville comedian, and you're writing in,
Oh no, I don't know, but I think that was the point of what she was saying.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
nobody knows who that
Nobody
is.
knows who that is.
Yeah.
And well, the movie Funny Girl, I think, or Funny Woman, that Barbara Streisand was in years ago, was based on Fanny Bryce's character.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I think that was what it was, but so they're telling her, you're writing books nobody wants. I can't get you $10 for a Fanny Bryce book, let alone a $10,000 advance. Go home, find either, write like Tom Clancy,
Yeah.
which,
Well,
Lee
what's
had.
interesting is that she said you basically got two options. Either A, you can quit being an a-hole, which she related to Tom Clancy because she said he appears on every talk show. He talks to everybody. He does
plays the
signings.
game.
People like him.
Yeah.
He gets out there and he puts his name out there. So she said either A, you can quit being an a-hole, or B, you can write books that people actually want to read.
Right. Yeah. And neither of which seemed to be an option for for Lee Israel.
Which it seems like, we brought up willfulness earlier. That's the example of willfulness.
Yeah.
Like, here's somebody who's wanting to help her and is giving her a real path, and she says, no, I don't want either one of those paths.
Right.
I want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Right. I don't want help. I want results.
Yeah, I want to keep doing what I'm doing, but I want it to turn out differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is just about all of us that have, experienced insanity in some form. And so, here she is, drinking herself silly. And she happens on these letters, finds out they're worth something. She's 3 months late on her rent. She's got a cat that is like the only thing on earth that she actually loves. That she says is actually the only thing that has ever loved her, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, she said that when the cat died, after all the stuff, the cat dies, and she said it was the only thing that ever loved me, and I thought, wow, that's a telling perspective, because it was all about the cat. In her personal life. But the other thing I thought was interesting too was, the cat, the apartment was just squalor. I mean, nasty.
Under the bed.
Under the bed, yes.
That was the litter box.
Yeah, it was, cat crap park under the bed, and she kept talking about this infestation of flies that she had. She kept experiencing, the flies.
I just connected that. She sat down on the bed at one point and had flies on the pillow, and she just kind of swept them off, flipped the pillow over, and then went to the super and was like, I need you to send a exterminator up.
Yeah.
And then later on, her and Jack
is the guy.
Yes.
Yeah, the character.
Her and Jack are like basically cleaning the apartment, and they both look under the bed, and it is covered solid with cat poop.
Yeah, and he's nearly nauseated. This guy that's eventually her accomplice, and the closest thing to a friend she probably had. But but what was interesting about that to me was, she walks into that apartment and doesn't really flinch. Jack and the exterminator and the landlord walk in behind her, and they are overcome with this putrid, horrible smell. But it was, I thought, and maybe it's a stretch, but I thought, that to me is symbolic of when you live in something long enough.
That's perfect.
You don't even notice it.
Yeah.
It's not even... Yeah.
It becomes normal for you.
Yeah.
Your tolerance for it is built up.
Yeah. And so she's walking in going, all right, I need to straighten up a little bit. And they're going, no, you need to like burn the place down or something. This is, and hands to the mouth, scarves to the face. I mean, putrid, horrible odor. And you live in something long enough, it just becomes normal. Like you said, you just don't know it anymore. You don't know anything other than that. And so there she is in this squalor and poor and firing off these letters that she eventually learns, that she can create. And more than the money, it was the payoff was that she believed these people were responding to her wit and her cynical humor and her writing, and it was an outlet for her. It was part of her creative self that got to be affirmed. It wasn't about, gee, I think I'll do something illicit and make money. What's something illegal I can do that I could generate a buck here? Yeah. It was about this, because I always tell in addiction, we're all getting something out of this.
Oh yeah, there's a payoff.
Yeah. And I don't think the payoff was the money. I really think the payoff was the affirmation.
Well, I think it was a double. I mean, because at the beginning of the movie, her cat is sick. She goes to the vet, and they say, "You still owe us a balance. We won't look at the cat until you pay us at least half."
Mm-hmm.
Which the balance was $84. She had 14 on her,
Yeah.
and she slid it across the table. And the nurse was like, "No, I'm sorry. It has to be half."
Yeah.
Her super came out and said she was 3 months behind on the rent.
Yeah.
She had just gotten fired from her job, so she needed the money. And
Yeah.
so I think what happened was this, and I think this happens a lot in addiction, is she went about something for a reason that wasn't totally bad.
Yeah.
And then she got a hit off of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
she found whatever letter that was above her bookcase.
Yeah.
She went and took it to somebody, and they offered her money for it.
Yeah.
And then I think the second one that she found was a legit one, but she added something to the bottom.
She added a PS.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
it was funny.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that got her either a little more money than the last one, or more money than the initial offer.
Yeah.
of
The
it.
book owner had said, gosh, if this had just, in the first letter, if this had been a little spicier, I could give you more. But, and so the second one she found, she added the PS and spiced it up.
Yeah.
And then that took it to that book.
So it's this kind of double payoff, because she needed money, but
Yeah.
also her career was in ruins, and she needed fulfillment. It's a lot of what you guys talk about on your podcast, is that she needed that thing that made her,
Right.
which was her writing, her creative expression. She had been lacking that for so long. So she got the hit of that, and she got the hit of the money, which is like a super hit.
Yeah.
And that just totally sucked her in.
Yeah. And I think that, being the character, being an alcoholic, and being, to what extent and to where she, went with that. I mean, I don't know Lee Israel's real, level of where she landed in her addiction. But I always tell people that resentment is what fuels our entitlement, that helps us justify behavior. So when when I see people going into resentment, that I get nervous for them, and really let's start taking apart this resentment thing that you've got going on right here, is that's going to fuel entitlement, that's going to help them justify a behavior. So I deserve is a dangerous word, or a phrase. And in Lee's case in this movie, I really felt like that was kind of the theme here, was because she was forgotten, she was alone, she was broke, and she could have been so much more, and she knew that, and she felt like there were people and entities standing in between her and her ability to be a Tom Clancy, for instance, because she had a lot of names for what he wrote. And she had this resentment for her agent, resentment for the public, resentment for her situation, and God knows what else. Broken relationships that she had experienced. They brought in, some of those. She was in relationships with women, and they brought in some of the, I think at least one of the exes of her that they met.
Yeah, and I can't remember the actress or the role's name, but it was the lady who played the Secretary of State on The West Wing.
Yeah.
I got her face in my mind, but
I can't think of her name. But the thing is they bring in these people who are telling her the truth about, this is what it's like to be in relationship with you. This is what it's like to experience you. And so I think she's got all this resentment that is what allowed her to feel that entitlement that took her eventually to the place where I'm just trying to get out of this hole. And
the FBI was coming after her.
Yes. Yeah. And she knew it, and then upped her game.
Which is, one of the biggest qualities of addiction is, despite negative consequences, it persists.
Exactly. Yeah. When an addict, instead of, wow, I got a DUI, I'm done. An addict will be like, I'm going to have to up my game. I'm going to have to figure out a better way to get to go out and do this.
Yeah. So clinically, two kinds of change that a person can experience. One, first order change. First order change is, I've got a behavior, whatever it may be. that there are negative consequences to. I don't like those consequences, so I'm going to change the behavior in order to avoid the consequences, but just to avoid the consequences. And so naturally, when the consequences go away, the behavior is going to come back because now the coast is clear. Nobody's looking at me anymore. I'm going to persist in what I was doing. Second order change recognizes that those negative behaviors and negative consequences don't just hurt me. They hurt the people I care about. They hurt the people in my community. They hurt others. And so because of that, my heart is going to go through a change.
Right.
And when our hearts change, our behaviors will follow and will remain changed because I recognize, there is a world outside of the 6 feet of personal space that exists around me at all times.
Right.
And so in an addict's case, when you see the negative consequences and they continue to persist, that's first order change. You do usually back off a little bit when that hits, but then like any good addict, you get creative and you go, okay, cool. So how do I get away with it? And keep persisting, which in her case involved counterfeiting, going into a library, slipping something out in her boot, like all kinds of...
replacing authentic documents with forgeries so that she was now selling the authentic documents so that they could pass the authenticity test, whatever those are. And
yeah, I wondered that.
Because I am like that, the skeptic of, this is a letter from, George Washington. I'm like, really? How do you know? I mean, because she was like baking the paper in the oven and making it all look aged. And I mean, she had this thing down. And it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. I think going back to what you said about the cat. So she meets Jack in a bar at some point. He gives her some attention that for some reason she's not threatened by, because it seems like anytime anybody gives her any kind of attention, it's met with hostility when it comes to her.
Right.
For some reason, she allows him to sit next to her at the bar and they strike up a conversation.
Yeah.
Continuing on in the movie, at some point, she asks him to cat sit for her.
Right.
And while she's gone, he gets into I don't know if it's a one-night stand, but it's certainly a very short relationship with another man.
Yeah, it's kind of a hookup.
Yeah, and he neglects the cat. So when she comes home, she sees the cat under the couch, and it's dead, and it just breaks her.
Yeah.
And you said... she said in the movie, you brought it up, this is the only thing that's ever loved her. And I think what's interesting about that is it goes back to that inability to form healthy and lasting emotional bonds. Cats don't, which, full disclosure, I'm a dog person. I have a dog. I love dogs.
I'm a dog person as well. I can't, I'm allergic to cats.
So,
I can't.
Yeah, my wife too. So like when I say that like cats don't really love you back, I'm going to recognize that yes, they do. Cats don't love you back in the same way that humans do. So, when she sits in the apartment and talks to the cat, when she, feeds the cat, sits on the couch next to the cat, it's not in the same way that it would be with a person.
Right. And did you perceive the cat's indifference to her?
Yeah.
Which I thought was also sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that I talk about with my clients that see me about addiction to porn. It is a way to enter into relationship in an attempt to get your relational needs met through fantasy, because it doesn't cost you anything.
Right.
A real relationship costs. You have to, the entry level is, I'm going to give you me. I'm going to give you my heart. But in porn addiction, you may enter into that fantasy because you need validation, because you want to have power over somebody, because you want to feel like somebody wants you. You want to feel like somebody has affection for you.
Yeah.
When really nobody does. It's a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's empty, but it allows you, at least for right now, to pretend. And it reminded me of that. Like, here she is saying, I love you to this cat. This cat's the only thing that loves me back. When in reality, she has a deep relational need that's going unmet.
Right.
And for her, this cat is a no-cost way to seem like she's getting that relational need met.
Well, and did you remember the scene, she's talking to the bookstore owner, lady, which I can't remember her character's name off the top of my head now, but the bookstore lady inquired what went wrong with your last relationship, or she had implied,
Was this
she'd
when they
been
were on the date?
Yeah. And Melissa said, oh, they, Melissa's character, she said you know how it is. They get on needy. They want you to share your feelings. You end up having to meet their family. You end up having to, and she put this whole litany of things together.
Oh, you mean a relationship?
Yeah, exactly. Where you go, oh yeah, that the part where you actually are in relationship with somebody, those things that people want to experience with you because they are in relationship with you, and she was like, that all just was a big pain in the ass.
That's all in her con column.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's all this demanding stuff, terrible, whereas over here I can just stay in this little one narrow lane, And I thought it was interesting, even the night she met Jack, when he walked her to her apartment, she shook his hand and she said, well, Jack, this was not unpleasant. And I thought, that's a really, that's kind of a lie you kind of might want to remember once in a while. But
it's like, that was like a very Dwight Schrute way of like addressing that. But that's one of my favorite things from The Office, when him and Jim are a part of the party planning committee, and Dwight's in charge of the decorations, and he makes a banner that says, "It is your birthday, period." And he's like, "What? It's a fact. I'm just stating a fact.
It is just a fact.
This was not unpleasant."
There's no filter. There's no decorating it. There's no icing it up,
But there's also no engagement.
Right.
And that's really what, was missing from her life. And that was a good example was, for whatever reason, she allowed the attention that he showed her in. So, I mean, she let him in more than anybody, but she didn't engage at all.
Right.
And so for her to say this wasn't unpleasant, that is the level that she's able to engage at.
That's it. Yeah. That's her emotional,
it's her ceiling.
Yeah. Top right there.
And part of when she writes these forgeries, and I think at some point, I think the beginning of when it starts to fall apart, she goes back to this same bookstore or dealer or whatever it is, the guy with the mustache, and she had said something along the lines of, my cousin has found these and he's asked me to, act on his behalf to get them sold or whatnot.
Yeah.
And when she comes in that time, she says something, "Oh, my uncle will be so pleased." And the guy's like, "Oh, I thought you said your cousin." "Oh, yeah, he's really," I think she said uncular to me.
Yeah. She did.
It's very uncular. I love that word. But it's, I think another perfect, oh man, exactly what I thought would happen is I love this movie now. It's a great example of the effects of addiction, because you build the web of lies
right
in order to keep it going, and you can't keep up with it because you've built it so intricately. And so right there, the lies start to fall apart. Oh, I thought I told this guy uncle when I told him cousin, but he remembers, and now no, he's really uncular to me.
And that's why I loved. I think the movie for me was because it's such a picture of my own truth in many ways, and the people that I see every day. We have all this resentment that fuels our entitlement, that brings us to justifying the behaviors we're in, but we always have to up the game. The game always has to change a little bit more, and we always have to keep up with it.
Because addiction's progressive.
Exactly, because addiction is not stagnant.
Right.
And we are willing to blow through the consequences in order to get to the payoff.
Ends justify the means.
Right, exactly. And so, she's engaging in all of this, and she's in it so long, like the cat crap. She's in it so long, she doesn't see the problem. Even
with Jack at one point, I think he had talked to he becomes her not advocate, but I guess like agent. She gets on a list. One of the guys that she goes to says your name's now on a list, so she can't now bring the letters to people. So he begins to bring the letters to people.
Right.
FBI shows up. They talk, or no, that's later. The librarian that she goes on a date with says, I'm gonna need to give this to an authenticator. So he comes back to Lee's apartment and she says, did you leave it with him? And he says, well, yeah, I left it. And she gets really mad. And then she says something about like, I can't believe you left it. I can't believe you talked. And in a fit of rage, she stands up and slams the table and says, if you ruin this for me, I'm going to kill you. Which I think is like that's like the peak of where it gets, is she's so far deep. And I didn't take that as hyperbolic. I didn't take that as her exaggerating. I took that as her feeling afraid and then lashing out in rage. Like, if you ruin this thing that I've built, that I'm getting so much from, I will kill you.
Yeah.
I'll do anything to keep this up.
Yeah. Just don't get between me and it.
Yeah.
And we're fine.
Which, give me a break. A better example of addiction is not going to be found.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't get in between me and my thing.
Yeah. And the fact that he was skimming from her a little bit at first, when he first took on that role of, doing those for her after she made the list, he's skimming a little bit, and even the addiction starts to steal from her. The thing at the end that threw me a little bit out of my addiction. I haven't decided where to put it in my addiction paradigm, but the real Lee Israel, kind of made a little bit of a comeback by writing this book about her experiences forging these
doing
things,
doing
this. And she kind of made a comeback, wrote a book that was widely read and published. And then she, of course, they made the movie, and I think she died in 2014 or something. So it's she's fairly recently.
I looked up the Wikipedia while we were watching it, and Leigh-Ann heard me at the side around. She's like, "What are you hawing at?" And I was like, "I'm just reading this lady's story." Like, sheesh.
Yeah, and so even kind of somewhere, she, which again, I thought this is a great picture of addiction, was in one of the last scenes when Jack comes into the bar and meets her after all this is said and done. She's had her court hearing. She got her, probation, and she got pretty easily compared to what she could have experienced consequence-wise. And he comes in and sits down, and she says something like, he said, well, I wouldn't have imagined you would want to meet here or something. And she said, no, well, I'm technically at a AA meeting on 10th Street. And, she's sitting there stirring a whiskey. And I thought, yeah, of course you are.
That's that first order change.
Yeah. And it's also court-ordered rehab or court-ordered AA meetings, but that's a whole other, element we could talk about sometime. But,
I think the mandatory
structures.
treatments are always, they go a little rougher than the person that comes in of their own volition. Mainly because they didn't make the decision.
Right. And they're not coming in because out of a broken place. They're coming in, to stay out of jail, which rarely is your primary motive, of real change, like you said. But, she's saying that to him. But it really threw me that, at the end of the day, Lee Israel wrote a book on this, made back her money, became known again, had a movie made out of her book, just sometimes you shake your head and go, wow, that's how it turns out.
Which, I think she still didn't get what she was ultimately after. She still didn't get... Now, I don't remember when the book was published, but she certainly didn't get better relationships. She certainly didn't get a better quality of life. In fact, what could be the lesson there is that she actually did get what she was after. She got more money. She got that creative fulfillment or whatever, and she was still left alone. And so it's a good example of how sometimes, getting the thing that we want isn't necessarily the best thing for us.
Right.
Which I think is the lesson that a lot of people learn in recovery.
Yeah.
Is it's that thing that I've been running so hard after, even if I were to get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like with our dog. There's one particular truck in our complex that is our dog's arch enemy. It's this giant black GMC Sierra with a kayak rack that's a lift kit, and it's just, and he'll bark at other cars and trucks.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different bark with this one. It's a terrified, high-pitched, unceasing, he goes nuts bark.
Wow.
And he will, on a leash, try to run towards it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, what would you do if you caught up with that truck? What would you do if you actually got that? I mean, its tires come up to my waist.
Yeah.
So like, what
Yeah.
are you gonna do? And in that case, she got that thing that she was chasing, but ultimately, it didn't actually help her,
Right.
as far as we know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not sure, what her emotional state was at the end of her life or anything, but it just it threw me a little bit of a curve that at the end of the day, all this whole sordid story had a payoff.
Yeah.
For her in some respect.
400 letters it says that she forged.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It is. And that is really, that's when you're sitting there going, that's a lot of intentionality.
Yes.
I mean, that's some work. And it just and 400 letters, you wonder if she'd applied that to, doing what her agent suggested and maybe just allowing her real self. But even at that, not to belabor it, but when Jane Curtin's character, the agent, told Leigh, write from your own voice. You hide behind these characters, these biographies. You don't even write with your own voice. Write from your own voice. And I'm thinking, she doesn't know what that is.
Yeah.
She doesn't have connection.
Oh, another good example of just like engaging with your own heart and finding your true self and like leaning into that.
Yeah. She can't write from her own voice.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that just kind of rolled up for me a picture of this is what it's like.
Yeah.
And as much as, it's not flattering, but I see myself in Leigh Israel's character, in that movie. Man, I can get capable of ugly when I get resentful and entitled and get out of the way.
Yeah. I think all of us can.
Yeah.
I think that's something that, in the Chip Dodd's Voice of the Heart, he talks about the 8 feelings that all of us can have and how each one has a gift and each one has an impairment. Resentment is the impairment of hurt. So if I'm hurt in relationship to you, but I'm unwilling to acknowledge that hurt, I'm unwilling to deal with that hurt, I'm unwilling to bring it to you, then what happens is that hurt that's unaddressed becomes resentment. And then that resentment grows and grows and grows and grows until it eats me alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a basic human experience. And certainly one that any of us, whether you fall into a category of somebody who fights against addiction or that's not the particular thing that you deal with, I think any of us can understand that. And we all get the same opportunity to choose to address it. I have totally, again, ended up on the side of watching a movie, saying I'd probably pass on it again, and now just being completely in love with it because of what it has shown me about the human experience and what I've learned from what it showed you. So I think we've learned so much from this movie. I'm wondering, tell me something that in your experience working with your clients, tell me something that you've learned from your clients.
Wow, that's a great question because I learn a lot from talking to my clients, and especially the ones that are really willing to risk. And I think as much as anything, bravery and honesty and courage when I see those things in the specific ways that some people have had to demonstrate that, man, it gives me it charges me up a little bit. I feel like, I got some stuff I got to face too, and that was a brave way you handled that, or that was a courageous way you handled that, or to have that conversation was risky and you did it. Man, that encourages me. Those are things that I take away.
Yeah.
Because so much of the time, folks that come to me and you and all of us, they feel like they don't have a lot to lose, so they kind of just go, I don't know, I'll do whatever. I mean, tell me to stand on my head. But when they display and they take initiative, and they demonstrate courage and bravery and risk, and they put whatever's left of their life out there on the line just so that they can have some restoration and recovery and hope, it encourages me.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a learned thing as much as it is just an inspiring thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that part of the beauty of what we get to do is we get to be not just observers, but companions in somebody's story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whenever you're in that with another person, you're really in it, you're really present. It is almost impossible to not be affected by it.
Yeah.
And to on a daily basis get to witness people soberly complete intention in that, evaluating and realizing and showing up to where they're at in their life, and knowing, okay, now there's new stakes.
Yeah.
Because I care now.
Yeah.
And then choosing to walk forward, maybe not knowing how it's going to turn out, but choosing to walk forward anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It's so courageous. And I think to a typical person, who maybe only has their own moments of courage to draw inspiration from, we get the benefit of our own and all of the people that we get to walk with.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to steward their story with them is a real honor.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a real honor. So let's say that somebody was listening to the show today and they felt like they would just be able to connect with you and want to see you as a client. How could they get a hold of you?
The best way would be to go to davidhamptoncprc.com. That's my website. And there is a contact me page there, information. You can email me. You can call me. My number is there. You can send me a message, and I'll get right with you, and we can set up a time for you to come in.
Boom. Can they find your books on your website as well?
They can, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, both books are on the website, and they are on Amazon and other places, but
there you go.
They're available.
I love it. And perhaps the thing that I would love to plug as well is your podcast that you host along with Nate Larkin, the Positive Sobriety Podcast.
Yeah, and thank you again for being a guest with us.
It was an absolute pleasure.
So good.
Anybody that's interested in listening to your show, anywhere that you find your podcast.
Right, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, wherever you get podcasts.
Yeah, just search Positive Sobriety, and I was this week's guest. So
yes,
if you want to hear me in the guest chair, go over to that show.
It was a great time. Yeah, we had a great time talking with you. You had some on being human, basically, I think is the capsule we would put that in.
That's actually something I was excited to find out is, looking at the other episodes and listening to them, it's almost like a brief summation. That's how I realized maybe the day or two before, I wonder what mine's going to be. I didn't know what it was going to, and so just to see it pop up in the feed yesterday, I was like, cool.
Yeah, we thought about just fun stuff Josh likes to talk about, but we did decide that was
nice. Well, thank you so much for being on. It has just been a complete pleasure.
It's been a joy. Thank you so much.
Hi, my love.
Hi.
What do you think is the difference between most of these wrap-ups that we do and today's?
Well, we are sitting next to each other instead of across from each other. And we're doing it in the morning.
I was really going for that we were at the beach.
Oh.
But but yes, those things that you said are also true.
I was trying to
Just
think
slightly less of a fun comparison.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your relax level right now?
10. Loving it. Yeah.
So, we watched the movie Can You Ever Forgive Me, which would definitely fall into the category of movies that when I got done, I was like, what? And then after I got done with the interview with our guest, David, I loved it. And I mean, didn't love it in the sense of this is the most entertaining movie ever.
Yeah, it's not like a fun watch necessarily. Yeah, I wouldn't say.
But loved it as I could see using clips from it in sessions and in workshops teaching on addiction.
Yeah.
What did you think about the movie? What did you think about the discussion with David?
So David's super cool. He was one of those that at several points in the middle of listening to it, I wanted to be in person and just put my hand out and be like, thank you so much for being here and like sharing. And I don't know. I just think it's cool that people trust you. And I like, it's kind of like an honor to get to hear their stories, you know, and to get to hear people's perspectives.
I definitely felt like what you just said when I was with him. It was just such an honor.
Yeah.
To be trusted with his story and to just sit and share with him.
Yeah. And similar to you, I think it is really funny. Like the movie did not necessarily like blow me away in terms of being exciting or, you know, fun or anything like that. But this is why this is so cool. It's true that just by the end of the podcast, you have a new appreciation for it because you're hearing about this perspective. So yeah, I thought all of those same things. Yeah, and then the episode, I'm trying to think of because a lot of it was his story. So there was a lot of me just like taking it in. I really liked when he said, he was talking about the monk at the monastery that he like went to or stayed at or whatever. And talking about prayer. And he said, I guess, and I'm going to butcher this, so I'm so sorry. But the monk said something about prayer being us telling God, like us preaching at God a lot of times, when really it needs to be more about, like we're telling him what to do. It needs to be more about what we need to do. And I love that. That's one of the things that I...
less talking, more listening.
Yeah. So anyway, I liked that. And I think when he said something about like learning language outside of churchy language, that hit me hard because I feel like I have also been through that, and it is really interesting to kind of, I think this is true. I'm saying this about church stuff, but I think it could apply to a lot of other things. I think it could apply to the therapy world, and I think it's sort of cool. And what you're trying to do in this, it's like you get so familiar and wrapped up in the world that you live in. So for you, like in the therapy community, for a churchgoer, you know, in the church community, that talking to somebody who's outside of that, if you still use the same language, like it's not the same. You can't expect everybody to understand the language from the world that you come to. And I come across that a lot in my job. Like we talk to mentors who are volunteers who are not social work professionals. Like, you know, they're not child development professionals. They haven't gone to school for this or trained in this. They're just people doing all sorts of different jobs. And so I come across that a lot, having to sort of translate things that are very, you know, run-of-the-mill, ordinary day language stuff in our office and like in our, you know, between kind of professionals, but translating it to someone who's not in that world, I think is an extra level of skill, you know? So he said, he made some comment about people telling her what it was like to be in a relationship with her. And like, I think he said that he could see her hurt in that. I feel like I mean, there were so many things that when he said it, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, like that is such a good depiction. And I don't even know why that quote of his kind of stood out to me, other than just how rough that must have been and how it must have made her feel even more likely to push away. You know, someone saying, you're all these things, like this is what it's like to be in a relationship with you.
It was when she was sitting on the park bench with the lady who used to be her girlfriend, who is the Secretary of State on West Wing.
Yeah. I think that's such a hard thing. And I think it's almost like I could see that being a worse nightmare, even for myself. And I feel like I try hard to work on myself and like be self-aware and things like that. So I can't imagine for someone who's not self-aware to hear things about like, hey, here's the things that suck about being in a relationship with you.
But it's a good example of a system at work, because typically in the life of an addict, and you see this in Leigh's life in the movie, people tend to quote unquote work around them, which at best is accounting for their deficits, at worst is enabling them. And so this was a, woman who had drawn a hard boundary with Leigh in the past, and then came back into her life in the present and basically spoke truth to her. And so that's a good example of how a lot of times in the life of an addict, it's really difficult but really necessary to hear what the behavior is, how it is affecting others, because that's a good way of. In my retail job, it was behavior impact, but it's a good way of, I guess, getting to the rock bottom that they need to get to, so that second order change can happen and they can change their life. And that was a good example of that in action, is that lady just saying. And I think what she said was something like, being in a relationship with you is like being your caretaker all the time, and I'm just not willing to do that anymore.
But that kind of leads me to the next thing, which is that you guys were talking at the end about how she sort of got what she, like, it ended up paying off for her, basically, is what he was saying, and how he struggles with that a little bit about the movie. But it also, I think that just made me think, I know of people, I think, I don't know if I've experienced this so much myself, as much as, like, I know. So I'm just going to say an example. I know somebody who's an adult, a grown adult, and their dad was not the nicest and lived his whole life like that. I think probably was an alcoholic, never went through recovery. So I don't know that you could say he was not an alcoholic at the end of his life, but I don't think he drank as much. But it just, and it never, he had a family, like, and he has since passed away, but there was never a rock bottom, a point of change for him. And so I did think that, like, as much as it does kind of stink to see that.
There might have been a rock bottom, but there might not have been change. Like, he could have bottomed out, but
yes, there's no change.
That doesn't mean for everybody the motivation to change appears.
So, like, just him pointing that out and saying, he kind of wrestled with that, like, that the movie depicted her sort of getting what she wanted, even though she didn't change. I just thought, like, that's realistic. I think that's a reality, that there are some times where people get away with not changing. But I do think she got the payoff of all of the external things, and you pointed this out, like, nothing about her relationships changed. Nothing about her in relationship with people changed. So ultimately, like, at the end of the day, she was still alone.
She got what she wanted, but she didn't get what she needed.
Yes. Ooh, that.
Yeah.
Boom. Nailed it. That's really all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think tremendous episode. Absolutely one of my favorites. Can You Ever Forgive Me?
Yeah.
Rent Pass By.
Oh, this is a tough one, because if you would have asked me at the end of the movie, I would have said pass. Now I think it's at least a rent. Potentially a buy if you have someone in your life who you care about, or if you yourself have, been an addict or gone through addiction stuff, or just a person going through any kind of recovery.
That circle just kept widening.
I know.
As you,
so like,
you finished the sentence. I thought you were just going to end with, or
there
if
we
you're just
go.
a person.
No.
Yeah.
A person going through any kind of recovery, because I think then it would be a buy so that you can like watch it and refer back to it and kind of just see the story.
I love it. Well, it looks like the tide is coming in. So I'm going to say, let's get back to vacationing.
Amen.
So let's go ahead and raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say for this week, the theater is closed.